Hello there, welcome to HFY Quantum Pro. Here, helping one another makes the universe smarter. So, what we are waiting for? Let's begin our story.
The bunk number on the paper said 7. Thyrac, C. Darren Cole looked at the paper. Then he looked at the door. Then he looked at the paper again. He had checked 3 times already. The number matched. So he pushed the door open and walked in. The room smelled like metal and something sharp, like the air before a thunderstorm. It was clean. Too clean. Everything placed with exact distance between each item. Darren's bunk room back on Earth had old posters and a broken fan. This room felt like a math problem. He set his duffel bag down on the empty bunk and sat on the edge. The mattress was firm and thin. The lights were cold white. Outside the single window, the Academy's outer ring stretched away in a long silver curve under a sky that was not Earth's sky. 2 moons, pale orange. He had not been sitting for 5 minutes when the door opened. The cadet who walked in was tall, much taller than Darren. For arms, 2 folded close to the body in what Darren would later learn meant controlled irritation. Scales the color of dark copper. Eyes like amber glass, bright and still. The Thyrac cadet stopped. Looked at Darren. Looked at the duffel bag on the bunk. Looked back at Darren. You are in the wrong room. Darren held up the paper. Bunk 7, Thyrac C. That's what they gave me. You are human. Yeah. This is the Thyrac residential wing. I know. The paper still says 7, Thyraxi. The Thyrac cadet, whose name Darren did not know yet, stood very still for a moment, then crossed to the small desk terminal and typed something fast with 2 hands while the other 2 stayed folded. Darren watched and said nothing. A pause. Then, the housing system has a registration error. Your species code was entered incorrectly. You were filed under Thyrac classification. Okay, Darren said. So, can we fix it tonight? Another pause. More typing. The housing officer is off duty. The correction queue does not process until the administrative period. 3 days. Darren looked around the room, looked at the narrow second bunk, looked at the sharp, clean lines of everything. Right, he said. Okay. This is not acceptable, the Thyrac cadet said. Voice flat and precise. I know. I'm sorry. I'm not trying to cause a problem. Darren picked up his bag and looked at the second bunk. Which side do you prefer to sleep on? I'll take whichever. The Thyrac cadet stared at him. Thyracs do not share quarters. It is a cultural matter of significant weight. I understand. I'm sorry about that. I genuinely am. Darren sat back down on the edge of the bunk. But neither of us made this mistake, and neither of us can fix it tonight. So, the Thyrac cadet did not respond, just stood, watching him with those still amber eyes. Darren did not push. He unpacked his bag slowly and quietly, put his few items on his side of the room, kept his things close, did not touch the desk, the shelf, the space near the window. He could feel the other cadet watching him, but did not look over. Later that night, Darren woke around the 3rd hour. The room was dark. The other cadet was not in their bunk. Riva, he would learn the name the next morning, was sitting at the desk in the dark, perfectly still, eyes open. Thyracs did not sleep the way humans did. They entered a rest state with awareness still partially on. Being forced to share a room disrupted the state entirely. Darren said nothing. He went to the small sink area, filled the 1 cup on the shelf with water, and set it on the corner of the desk nearest Riva. Then he went back to his bunk and lay down. Riva did not move, did not speak, did not drink the water, but did not throw it away. The first training morning was a physical assessment, the kind that sorted cadets by strength, speed, and endurance scores. The results were posted on the central ranking board in the hall. Darren had expected to be low. He was not prepared for the instructor to use his placement as an example. Instructor Bowl was Thyrac, like most senior combat staff. Long-serving, decorated, with the particular manner of someone who had decided long ago what a thing was worth. He pointed to the board. Note the human placement, he said to the assembled cadets. Species average falls within expected range. Humans are admitted as a probationary measure by union policy. Manage your expectations during cross-species drills. Some cadets did not react. Some did. Darren heard a low sound from somewhere in the group. Not quite a laugh. Close enough. He looked at the board for a moment. His name, the number beside it. the space between it and the next name above. Then he said, quiet enough that only the cadets near him heard, "That just means I have more room to move." No one responded. Bull was already moving on. But Riva, standing 2 rows back, heard it. And for reasons Riva would not examine until much later, did not forget it. 3 days passed. The housing correction came through. Darren was reassigned to the human residential wing. He packed his bag the same way he had unpacked it. Quietly. Took nothing that was not his. At the door he paused and looked back. The cup was still on the corner of the desk. Still full. He left without a word. The drill schedule was posted the night before, and Darren read it twice. His name was listed in the first combat pairing of the morning session. The name beside his was Dross. He did not know much about Dross yet. What he could see was enough. Brockary, the species built like something that had been made to stop things from moving. Broad at the shoulder, low to the ground, skin that had the texture of old stone. Dross moved through the halls with the easy slowness of something that had never needed to rush. Noru had seen Darren reading the schedule. That is not a good pairing, Noru said. Noru was small, narrow-shouldered, with large dark eyes and a habit of stating things as plain fact without softening them. Lindari were like that. I figured, Darren said. The standard outcome is significant physical disadvantage for the lighter party. That's one way to put it. You could request a reassignment on the basis of mass differential. Darren folded the schedule. No. Nora looked at him the way a person looks at something they cannot categorize. Then went back to reading. The drill floor was wide and bright. The surface was a firm material that absorbed impact, which Darren would come to appreciate. Cadets from 7 or 8 different species stood in loose lines along the walls. Instructor Bull stood at the far end with a data board, watching without expression. Dross looked at Darren the way you look at a small inconvenience. Not hostile, just unimpressed. This was somehow worse than hostility. The drill was simple. Controlled contact. No weapons. First to force the other off the mark floor area won the point. Dross won the point in 11 seconds. Darren was off the mat before he understood what had happened. He had tried to hold ground. That had been the mistake. Something heavy and inevitable had connected with his side, and the next thing he knew, he was 2 steps outside the line and Bull was already moving on. From somewhere along the wall came that sound again. Not quite a laugh. Dross looked down at him. Not unkind, just factual. You try to stand still. Against Brockary, that is always wrong. Darren got up, straightened his shirt, looked at the mat, then looked at Dross's feet. And for just a half second before Dross turned away, Darren watched the weight shift. He watched how Dross moved back to the line, the way the right foot came forward, the pause, the resettlement. Bull used the pairing as a demonstration piece in the debrief. He pulled up the footage on the wall screen, pointed to Darren's stance, explained the failure in terms of species' physical parameters. Some cadets listened seriously. Some just watched Darren. Darren was watching the footage of Dross. Nora found him in the practice corridor that night. It was technically unscheduled time. The corridor had a wall of pads and an open floor. Darren had been there for 2 hours. "You're still here," Nora said. "I'm still here." Nora came in and sat on the bench near the wall. Watched Darren run a movement pattern. "Stop. Adjust. Run it again." On Lindar, Noru said, when a person is embarrassed publicly, they do not leave their room for several days. Sometimes a week. Darren stopped. Looked over. That sounds exhausting. It is considered appropriate processing time. "I don't really process that way," Darren said. He went back to the movement. "What are you doing?" "Brockary have a lag," Darren said. "Before a power strike. Their weight loads into the back foot first, and there's about half a second between that load and the release. You can see it if you watch the hip line." Nora was quiet. "How many times did you watch the footage?" "Enough." 2 days later, the second pair drill came up. The pairing was random. The board put Darren against Dross again. Dross looked mildly surprised, then returned to unimpressed. The drill started. Dross moved forward with that same comfortable inevitability. Darren moved differently this time. He did not stand still. He gave ground in a direction. Small, deliberate. He watched the hip line. He waited. The load. The back foot. The half second. Darren stepped inside. He did not try to overpower. He redirected, used the angle, and pushed with both hands at the moment of least balance. Dross went down sideways. Not hard, not hurt, just down. The hall was very quiet. Dross lay on the mat for a moment, then made a sound that Darren did not recognize. A low exhale that he would later learn was Brockary for something close to genuine surprise. Dross sat up and looked at Darren with something new in his expression. "You watched the footage," Dross said. "Yes," Darren said. Bull had not moved from his place at the far end. His data board was in his hand, but he was not looking at it. Noru, from the wall, made no sound at all. Just watched. That night, Bull went back to his office and pulled up the footage from both drills. He watched them back to back, 3 times. He did not change Darren's ranking on the board. He sat for a while in the quiet office with the screens off. Then he picked up his data board and made a note in the cadet file. The note said, "Observational retention. Applied analysis under social pressure. Review again at next assessment." He did not tell Darren this. Darren would not have cared either way. He was already asleep, which was something Instructor Bull, who had been doing this for 19 years, noted was also unusual. Most cadets who won something unexpected stayed up thinking about it. This one just went to sleep. The wilderness simulation zone was not actually wilderness. It was a constructed environment, several kilometers of fabricated terrain sealed under a dome, with weather controls and preloaded hazard variables. But it felt real enough when the ground was uneven under your boots and the air smelled like wet stone. The team assignment came up the night before. Darren, Riva, Noru, and 2 others. Cadet Pell, a tall Viraki with narrow eyes and a habit of calculating things out loud. Cadet Tusk, also Viraki, quieter, who went wherever Pell went. The objective was simple. A beacon in the interior of the zone, 40 hours to retrieve it and return to the exit point. No weapons. Standard survival gear. Team ranking based on time, condition, and group integrity score. They entered at sunrise, which in the dome meant the lights shifted from gray to pale yellow. The terrain was rocky for the first stretch, then opened into a stretch of low, dense growth that grabbed at boots. Riva moved efficiently. Noru kept pace with effort. Pell and Tusk stayed together at the back, talking in low voices. Darren walked and watched the ground. For hours in, Noru went down. The slope was not steep. A loose patch of surface, a bad step, and Noru fell hard. The sound was wrong. Darren was there before Noru stopped moving. He checked the leg. Not broken, but the ankle had turned badly. Noru's face was tight with pain, but Noru said, quietly and precisely, "I can still move." "Slowly," Darren said. He was already looking at the kit. Pell came forward and looked at the ankle, then looked at the terrain ahead, then to the math out loud. At reduced speed, we arrive past the scoring threshold. The optimal route is to mark this position, leave water and a locator, and complete the objective with 4. Noru said nothing, was looking at the ground. Tusk glanced at Darren. Pell was already pulling out the locator unit. Darren said, "We're not leaving Noru." Pell stopped, looked at Darren with a kind of patient precision. "The scoring impact is significant. The shelter protocol exists for exactly this situation. Noru will be retrieved when the simulation ends." "I know. We're still not leaving." Riva had not spoken yet, was standing slightly apart, watching. Pell looked at Darren for another moment, then at Tusk. Some kind of agreement passed between them that did not need words. "Then we will proceed without you," Pell said. Not unkind, just the conclusion of a calculation. They left. Their footsteps faded into the low growth. Riva said, "Your ranking will drop significantly." "I know. There was no formal agreement obligating you to this." Darren was working on the ankle, using the brace material from the kit. "I told Noru at the start that we would get out together. That is what we are doing." Riva considered this. "You said it casually, as a common phrase of encouragement. It was not a contract. It was something I said. That makes it mine." There was a silence. The dome lights had shifted toward midday yellow. Something in the fabricated trees made a recorded sound, distant and hollow. "That is not a logical standard," Riva said. Darren finished the brace and helped Noru sit up. "Maybe not." They moved slowly. Darren adjusted the pack load, took Noru's weight on the rough sections, found the paths with the least elevation change. Riva, without being asked, moved ahead to scout the ground and came back with route choices. They did not talk much. There was a rhythm to it after a while. Noru, after a long, quiet stretch, said, "You did not have to do this." "I know," Darren said. "On Lindar, when someone is injured in a group exercise, the group is not expected to stay. There is no shame in the standard protocol." "Okay, I am saying," Noru continued carefully, "that you're not obligated by my culture or yours." Darren looked at Noru. "Noru, I know. I just didn't want to leave you." Noru did not respond to this for a while. They made a small sound that Darren could not interpret. Later he would learn it was the Lindari equivalent of something between relief and embarrassment. They reached the beacon 3 hours past the first scoring threshold. Retrieved it. Made the return. Reached the exit at hour 44. Their ranking was low. Fourth of 5 remaining teams. Pell and Tusk had gotten lost on the return route. Their locator had a calibration error they had not checked before departure. They were extracted at hour 38, last place. Instructor Bowl read the outcome reports in his office that night. He spent a longer time on Darren's team file than the others. He read the movement log, the pace adjustments, the route choices. He pulled up the regulation on group integrity scoring. Read it again. Found the clause about voluntary unit cohesion choices made without tactical necessity. It was designed for a different kind of situation. He used it anyway. He adjusted the team's final score upward. It moved them from 4th to 2nd. Then he wrote in Darren's individual file, maintained stated commitment under ranking pressure. No tactical gain. No formal obligación. Did it anyway. He stopped. Read it back. Added one more line. This species is strange. He filed a report. Turned off his screen. Sat in the dark office for a moment, thinking about a casual phrase said at the start of mission and treated by one human cadet as if it were made of iron. Strange, he thought again, but not, perhaps, in the way he had originally meant. The command simulation was worth more than any single drill. It sat in the assessment record like a fixed point. Cadets knew this. They spent the week before it in a specific kind of quiet that meant everyone was preparing and no one wanted to show it. The premise was straightforward. Each cadet led a mixed squad of 6 through a tactical scenario. The scenarios were different for each leader. The squads were assigned randomly, deliberately pulled from incompatible groupings. The point was not to win easily. The point was to see what a cadet did when things were difficult. Darren's squad was handed to him on a sheet the morning of the simulation. He read the names. 2 Thyrak cadets, 1 Brakari, 1 Lindari, 1 Varaki, and a cadet from a species called Sulhuri, who were known for being exceptional at technical work and deeply uncomfortable with physical confrontation. He spent the first hour of the simulation not moving. Other squad leaders were already issuing orders. You could hear it through the communication links during the setup phase. Sharp instructions, position assignments, the language of people who had decided what each body was worth and where to put it. Darren called his squad together and asked them to sit down. The Thyrak cadets looked at each other. The Brakari, whose name was Grull and who was not Dross, stood with his arms crossed and waited. The Sulhuri cadet, Wes, sat immediately and seemed relieved to not be standing. Darren said, "Tell me what you were good at. Each of you. One thing. The most useful thing." Silence. Then Wes said, "Systems. I can read a technical layout faster than most." One Thyrak cadet said, "Close formation movement." The other said, "Threat assessment. I can read a position and find the weakest point in under a minute." Grull said nothing for a moment. Then, "I can hold ground. If I am in a position, I stay in it." The Lindari cadet, whose name was Fun, said quietly, "I am fast, and I am small. I go places others do not fit." The Varaki cadet said, "Long sight. I see far. I track movement well." Darren listened to each one, did not write anything down, just listened. Then he looked at the scenario map for the first time and explained the objective. Not the full strategy, just the goal. And then he told each cadet where they fit in it and why, using exactly the thing they had just told him about themselves. He did not say, "Do this." He said, "This is why you're the best one for this. The simulation began. For the first 20 minutes, it looked unremarkable. Darren's squad moved slower than some of the others. He stopped twice to ask Wes to confirm a layout reading. He asked the Thyrak cadets to take the front formation and told them exactly what he needed held and what could flex. He put Grull at a junction point and said, "Stay here until I tell you otherwise." Nothing passes. Grull stayed. At minute 23, the scenario introduced its first change. The command channel was disrupted. A simulated jamming effect that cut off the central communication link between squad leaders and their members. Most squads began to slow. Some stopped entirely, waiting for orders that could not come. Darren's squad kept moving, because Wes already knew the layout and had already been given the goal. Because the Thyrak cadets knew their position and what flexible meant. Because Finn had already been told which paths needed fast movement and had been watching for them. Because Grull was holding a junction and had not been told to stop, so did not stop. They completed the objective 11 minutes after the jam, without a single instruction from Darren during that stretch. At the debrief, Bull pulled up the footage on the main screen. He ran through each squad's performance. He reached Darren's and stopped on the minute 23 mark. Showed the communication blackout. Showed the other squads. Showed Darren's squad continuing. He said nothing for a moment. The room waited. Every other squad relied on continuous command, Bull said. When the link dropped, the squad stopped. Because they had been positioned and ordered and given no reason to understand the purpose behind the position. He moved the playback forward. This squad was given the purpose before the order. When the link dropped, the purpose did not drop. He turned off the screen. Review this. All of you. The room stayed quiet as cadets filed out. Darren was near the back. Bull let everyone else go, then stepped forward. Where did you learn that method? Darren looked up. I didn't learn it anywhere. You gave each cadet a reason to act, not just an instruction to follow. That is a trained approach. It is taught at senior level. I just thought about what I would want if I were them, Darren said. If someone gave me a position without a reason, I would follow it until I couldn't. If someone told me why I was the right one for it, I would follow it past the point where I couldn't. Bull looked at him. The way he had looked at the footage 3 times alone in his office after the wilderness simulation. The same expression of a person whose categories were quietly being rearranged. He said nothing more. Walked away. Darren went back to his room. The next morning, the ranking board had changed. His name had moved. Not to the top, but no longer near the bottom. He looked at it for a second on the way to breakfast, then kept walking. There was a smell to the reactor maintenance wing that the cadets who trained there got used to eventually. Something between hot metal and recycled air. The systems were not dangerous under normal operation. The exercises run in that wing were controlled, supervised, designed to give cadets a working familiarity with the kind of equipment they might encounter on deployment. Nothing was supposed to go wrong. Darren was not even assigned to the maintenance session that evening. He was passing through the lower corridor on his way back from the equipment storage block when the lights changed. The overhead strip shifted from standard white to the amber of a non-critical fault alert. A low sound followed. Not an alarm. A step before an alarm. He stopped. Down the corridor, 30 meters ahead, a door was sealed. The kind of seal that happened automatically when a power fluctuation hit a sublevel junction. The door was rated to hold until emergency teams cleared the fault and confirmed safe reopening. Standard. Correct. The door was doing what it was supposed to do. On the other side of that door were 3 cadets. He could hear them through the ventilation gap at the base. One of them was Noru. Darren crouched at the door and said, "How many of you?" 3. Noru's voice. Steady but tight. There's a coolant vent that opened when the junction faulted. The air is not clean. Darren checked the panel beside the door. It was locked into fault hold protocol. You needed an emergency code or an engineering override to open it outside of normal procedure. He had neither. He stood up and looked at the panel, then pulled out his comm unit and sent a fast message to Riva. Riva arrived in 4 minutes. Did not ask questions at first, just looked at the panel, then at Darren. Emergency teams are already dispatched. Estimated arrival is 12 minutes. The air on the other side is contaminated. Noru said the vent opened. Riva looked at the ventilation gap, calculated something, said, At standard contamination rate for that vent type, the safe exposure window is approximately 8 minutes. Darren said, "Can you get through the panel?" Riva looked at it again. It is a fault hold lock. The override requires a senior engineering code. "Can you get through the panel?" Darren said again. A pause. Riva understood what was being asked. Not whether it was allowed, whether it was possible. "Yes," Riva said, "but I need to access the secondary relay behind the faceplate. And someone needs to hold the manual interrupt while I reset the lock sequence. Tell me what to do." Other cadets had gathered in the corridor by now, standing back, watching. One of them, a senior Thyrak cadet, said, "Protocol requires holding position until emergency response. Unauthorized door access during a fault hold is a 3-point protocol violation." Darren did not look at them. He was holding the manual interrupt exactly as Riva had told him to. "I know," he said. Riva worked fast. Both sets of hands, the second pair doing things the first pair could not reach. Darren held the interrupt steady. The panel made sounds he did not recognize. The amber light in the corridor pulsed. At the 6-minute mark, the door unsealed. The 3 cadets inside came out into the corridor air. Noru immediately. Then the other 2, all moving under their own power. Noru's eyes were watering, which was a contamination response in Lindari physiology. Not permanent, but it would have been worse. Emergency teams arrived at minute 11. Looked at the open door, the unsealed panel, the gathered cadets. Darren was standing with his back against the corridor wall. He did not try to explain what had happened or hide what had been done. He just waited. The review board convened 2 days later. Darren sat across from 5 senior staff members and listened to the list of protocols he had bypassed. 3 violations, each one specific, each one real. He did not argue with any of them. Admiral Saya Oren sat at the end of the table. She had said nothing for the first 40 minutes of the review. She was watching Darren the way Bowl had watched the footage, quietly, with the focus of someone building a picture. The board was discussing the appropriate disciplinary measure when Oren set down her file. 3 cadets are breathing normally today, she said. The room went quiet. Note the protocols he violated. Document them properly. And then, she said, convene a separate review of whether those protocols account for an 8-minute contamination window in a fault hold situation. She looked at the board. Because apparently they do not. She looked at Darren one more time. Said nothing more. The disciplinary measure was a formal notation. No ranking penalty. The protocol review she called for found 2 gaps in the fault hold procedure and corrected them within the month. That night, Riva came into the common area where Darren was sitting and sat across from him. The first time Riva had chosen to sit near Darren without any assigned reason to do so. "You could have been expelled," Riva said. "Yes. The risk calculation was not in your favor." "No." Riva looked at him. "You knew Noru was in there." Darren said nothing. "That is the calculation you used," Riva said. "Not a question." "I didn't use a calculation," Darren said. "I just knew Noru was in there." Riva sat with that for a moment, then looked at the small cup still sitting on the corner of the table between them. A different cup. Same placement. Darren had started doing it without thinking about it. Just something he did. Riva reached out and drank from it. Said nothing. Neither did Darren. The ceremony hall was the largest enclosed space at the academy. High ceiling, clean lines, the kind of room that had been designed to make everything happening inside it feel like it mattered. Every year-end assessment was read aloud here. Every cadet present. Every score on record. Darren stood in the 3rd row and looked at the ceiling for a moment before the ceremony started. He was thinking about nothing specific. That was unusual for him. Usually his head was running through something. A sequence, a problem, a conversation from earlier. Today it was quiet. Nora was beside him. Nora had been standing close to Darren at most events for the last 2 months, which Darren had noticed and not commented on. Riva was in the Thyrak row, which was sorted by species for the formal portion. Riva had looked over once when the cadets were filing in. Darren had nodded. Riva had looked forward again, which for Riva meant the same thing as nodding back. Dross was 4 rows ahead. He was easy to spot, being broadly built and taller than most of the cadets around him. He had spoken to Darren twice in the past month, short conversations, a question about a drill, a comment, about training schedules. Not quite friendship, the beginning of something that might become one. Instructor Bowl stood at the front with the assessment board. The scores were read in order, category by category. Technical proficiency, physical assessment, scenario performance. Darren's name appeared in the middle of most of these. Unremarkable. Not low, not high. He had improved. The record showed it plainly. Then Bowl reached the last 3 categories. Unit cohesion under pressure, Bowl said. He read the top 5 scores. Darren was first. The number beside his name was the highest in the hall, across every species represented. A silence. Not the cold kind. The kind that means people are paying attention. Field adaptability. First again. The silence in the room was different now. A few cadets turned in the rows to look. Command under uncertainty. Bowl paused for exactly 1 moment before he read the name. Then read it. First again. These 3 categories were new. Added this year, Bowl had proposed them in a written recommendation submitted 6 weeks after the command simulation, 2 weeks after the fault hold incident. The categories had been approved by a review committee that included Admiral Oren. They were not symbolic. They were now permanent parts of the Academy assessment structure. Darren stood in the 3rd row and did not move. Nora made a sound, low and specific. The Lindari equivalent of crying was not wet. It was a vibration in the chest, almost inaudible, that meant something had hit a place that mattered. Darren put his hand briefly on Nora's shoulder, left it there for a moment, then took it away. At the reception afterward, the cadets spread through the hall in loose groups. Food was laid out on long tables. The formality dropped by degrees. Darren was standing near the far wall with a cup of something warm that he had not drunk yet when Dross approached. Dross stopped in front of him, looked at him for a moment, then gave a slow nod. The Brock-Harry kind, with a head drops forward and holds for a beat. Darren had learned by now what it meant. A recognition. Not quite respect, but the thing that came just before respect decided to sit down. Darren nodded back. Dross moved on. No words. None needed. Admiral Oren found Darren near the end of the reception. She was not the kind of person who announced her approach. She was simply there. She looked at Darren the same way she had looked at him in the review boardroom. That quiet building a picture focus. She said, the next intake class will study 3 case files from this year's cohort. Methods. Decision points. Outcomes. Darren waited. All 3 are yours, she said. She did not wait for a response. Just moved away through the crowd with the easy movement of someone who always had somewhere to be. He had not arrived here with a strategy. He had arrived with a duffel bag and a paper with a wrong room number on it. Later, when the hall had thinned, Riva walked with Darren through the outer corridor. Not to the same place, just the same direction for a stretch. At the junction where the corridor split, Riva stopped. I've been thinking, Riva said, about the cup of water. Darren looked over. The first night, when you put on the desk. I did not drink it. I know, I should have, Riva said. Not because I was thirsty, but because it was a correct thing you did, and I ignored it. Because you were human, and I did not think a human could do a correct thing without a reason I already understood. Darren was quiet. I was wrong, Riva said. It was the most words Riva had ever put together into something personal. It clearly cost something to say. Darren said, it was just water. Riva looked at him. No, it was not. They stood at the junction for a moment, then went their separate ways down the corridor. Darren's story would be told at the academy for 30 years. Not as a lesson about strength, not as a lesson about strategy, as a lesson about a wrong room, a cup of water, and what happens when a person does the small correct thing even when no one is watching. That, other species would come to say, was the part they could never fully explain, and the part they never stopped thinking about.